Well, if you ask a BYU fan, they would tell you they're going to win the Big 12 championship easily. I think an Iowa State fan would say the same. Who's the biggest threat to the top dogs in this conference? This is a crossover with Locked On Big 12 and Smothered and Covered.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome into a crossover edition of Locked On Big 12 and Locked On College Football Smothered and Covered. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. That's Barrett Sallee here to talk all things this conference and college football in general. We will start with the biggest threat to BYU and Iowa State in the Big 12 championship race. In the middle segment, is it time to buy Deion Sanders and the Colorado Buffs as a real national contender? And we'll finish it off with one Big 12 team making the college football playoff or multiple. If you hit subscribe, we get to keep our jobs. And Barrett, rent isn't that cheap right now for yours truly, so I would like to keep my job. And we'll start it off right here. Biggest threat to BYU and Iowa State. I'll leave it general for you. We'll put it right there. Who could create chaos at the top of the Big 12?
Well, yeah, you're right, though. First of all, yeah, pay our bills. We need bills. I have two kids, Drake, and I ain't going to lie. Private school is not cheap, and I need to get them tuition. It's due here in one day, actually. Gosh.
And Daryl, one day they're going to go to college, which is even less cheap than that.
Well, you know what? I told him, look, dude, I told my 13-year-old, look, dude, scholarships are changing. College athletics are changing. Go get a baseball scholarship.
Yeah.
That's it. Go get a baseball scholarship. No, I said this before the season, Drake, and I think it's bearing out how I thought. The Big 12 is the dumbest, wildest, craziest, awesome conference there is. Right. We talked about it last year with the Pac-12, how it was going to be wild. You didn't know what you were going to get, but it's going to be awesome every single week. And the Big 12 is that. You know, how many people thought BYU was going to be the class of the conference? And even Iowa State, I don't remember who put it on Twitter, but someone took the top 4 teams in the preseason predictions, and only one of them is worth a damn.
Top 5. Yeah. Even Arizona at 5 is terrible.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Kansas. I mean, everyone was all over Kansas and Jalen Daniels, and then no, that didn't happen. But, you know, BYU and Iowa State obviously have been the class of the conference, but I look toward Kansas State flying under the radar. Not many people have paid attention to Kansas State all that much, but they play Iowa State at the end of the season. Both those teams kind of have easier schedules, right? Easy-ish schedules, right? So you look towards the end of the season, you're like, okay, we could be talking about that as a de facto play-in game. To me, I still think the two. I'm not to be boring, and dodge the question. Iowa State and BYU are so far ahead by Big 12 standards, which it's a little different because far ahead by Big 12 standards is still not that far ahead. But, Iowa State's so complete, right? We generally talk about Iowa State as, defense, run the football, and there's still that. But they have a quarterback. It's like the Brock Purdy days, right? He's not going to go out and win a Heisman Trophy, but Beck's pretty good, right? Not going to do dumb things. Yeah. Be smart. And so I love Iowa State and BYU. I mean, I've said this. I'm old. I'm 44 now, but I've said this for a long time. When BYU has dudes that have AARP cards and mortgages and all of that stuff and have multiple kids, that's when they're dangerous. And here we are. So, I'd say Kansas State is probably that team. I fell into the Utah trap, and I'm just so disappointed. I love Cam Rising, man. It's almost like I really, really wanted him to be that dude, and it just sort of all fell apart. But I'd say Kansas State. I just think they've got the coaching, they've got the players on offense, they've got the defense that is, not gonna screw things up. It's not gonna have their C game defensively is still pretty darn high. Their floor is pretty darn high. And I think in the Big 12, having a high floor is really better than having a high ceiling because nobody's got a high ceiling.
Barrett, a couple things to touch on there. One, Jay Catch, who hosts Locked On Cougars representing BYU, he referenced in a squad show a couple weeks ago that he has 3 kids, which brought up that means he's probably a senior at BYU or has at least a little eligibility left.
He just got there, right? He just declared his major.
Yeah, and that is the case for that, and Utah is kind of in that boat as well. But for BYU to have so many senior players or so many players who have experience in college football, or at least experience in life as they go into BYU. And I want to personify is the wrong word, but I want to put into context what you've given as far as chaos goes. The Big 12 leads the FBS with 17 lead changes in the fourth quarter in conference play this year. The most go-ahead scorers in the final 3 minutes of conference games with 11, and 86 lead changes and ties during Big 12 play, the most of any FBS league. Here's what I think is misconstrued often with the national narrative, though, is that the Big 12 is so chaotic, there cannot be elite teams at the top or great teams at the top who are good enough to win every game in front of them. Sure, Texas Tech's losing to Baylor. We didn't see that coming. Sure, there are some crazy things going on in the middle of the conference, but I think it's also worth noting that BYU and Iowa State, they just keep winning.
Yeah. Oh, and there's something too. Look, it's the exact same thing we said 2 years ago, right? With TCU. The entire month of October for TCU might as well have been going to the bar and taking shot after shot after shot because it was just wild, crazy, dumb, and awesome, right? Yeah. And they found their way out of it. Obviously went undefeated, went to the title game, and great. And you can still have that, right? You can still have a team come out of there, despite the fact not being that far ahead of the second, third, fourth, fifth place team in the conference. Right. You can still have a team that just the bounces go their way. They find that they're smarter in key situations. They get the fumble luck, or whatever. And so, yeah, I think there's a narrative out there, especially this year, right? Because we've never done this before. I keep going back. When I talk about the 12-team playoff, and I don't know if folks have listened to me, watched me, read me for years and years and years. I hate the 12-team playoff. I didn't like the 14 playoff. I love the BCS. But I've conceded the loss like a presidential election. I've called. I'm like, okay, you win. Yeah. But we've never done this before, right? So for a team in the Big 12, like a BYU or an Iowa State that don't necessarily have the name brand and, aren't really watched all that much, how is the committee going to look at that? Yeah, we don't know. And I go back to 2014. In 2014, Ohio State lost to Virginia Tech in week 2. Everybody said Ohio State's dead. The Big Ten lost every single game that week. The Big Ten's dead. Well, Ohio State won the national championship. Yeah. So we don't know what this means, but what we do know is that Iowa State, BYU, even Kansas State, they're pretty darn good. And I'd say all three of them are getting better as the season goes along, which is huge.
Could argue, too, that 2014 season, because of TCU and Baylor being where they were, was another catalyst for moving to a 12-team playoff. How do we incorporate more schools that felt like they were at the top with the elite level talent? And here we are at 12 teams. Yeah, sorry, Barrett.
You, TCU, and Baylor screwing everything up for me.
Yeah, who played this week? The rivalry this week in conference. But I think, Barrett, there's a fan base out there who has gotten this deep in the show saying, what about us? Why haven't we been talked about as contenders in the Big 12 right now? And that's Colorado. Let's go there next, because when we're talking about brands that can wiggle their way into the national conversation, Deion Sanders has one. This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On College Football Smothered and Covered crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. There's a pretty blonde lady I've been seeing recently who's very pretty, and she wanted to go see Taylor Swift in concert. And I was like, oh, not sure if you've seen those ticket prices. They're not cheap unless you go to Game Time. You download the Game Time app, and Game Time gives you the lowest price guaranteed, including super deals and curated deals and the seat view before you buy it. And I toggle the feature that shows me the all-in pricing. So it's not, $50 ticket, and then you go to check out and it's $95. No. Game Time, you toggle the feature, it shows you the total up front. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase, and buy a football ticket or a Taylor Swift ticket. Terms apply. Again, while she's at Taylor Swift, I'll be at the Holy War next weekend thanks to Game Time. Terms apply. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first order. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's Game Time. Barrett Salee joining me here from Locked On College Football Smothered and Covered alongside Locked On Big 12. A little crossover where we talk the Colorado Buffs here. Deion Sanders and company have wiggled their way into the top 25. Barrett, buy or sell Colorado as of late October?
I say this as somebody who never really bought into Colorado having actual football success, but you have to buy.
Yeah,
you have to buy. Like, I thought going into season 2, hey, if they make a bowl game, Deion might deserve Coach of the Year candidate discussion. Now, we didn't know Kurt Signetti was going to do this and Clark Lee, but whatever. I'm buying because they've found a way to disguise their weaknesses. They are not a complete team. Right. That you look at Colorado play, they've still got some offensive line issues.
No doubt. Got
some depth issues, whatever. All of those things still exist. They found a way to work around it. And in a Big 12 where you kind of just throw up your hands and say, I don't know what's going to happen on every single week. What we do know is Colorado keeps finding ways to win, and the schedule sets up so well for them at Texas Tech, Utah, Kansas, and Oklahoma State. Before the season, we'd look at that and be like, holy crap, they're going to lose 3 or 4 of those. And now it's like, holy crap, they could win out. Like, legitimately, they could win out. And honestly, with a healthy Travis Hunter and a healthy Shedeur Sanders, that might be all that they need, which is crazy thinking, considering that's Utah and Oklahoma State in that group, the 2 teams that I thought would play in the Big 12 championship game. It's Tom Luganville and I said this on Sirius XM on Sunday, and both of us were sort of the same breath with Colorado. Even after the 3-0 start last year, they might only win 3 or 4 games last year. Even after that, it obviously happened. And this year, get to a bowl game and you're good. You have to recalibrate your view of everything. We could be talking about Colorado actually in the playoff discussion, which, like, I have kids, anger in what's the movie about feelings? God, I'm drawing.
Oh yeah.
Inside Out. The gif of anger and his head exploding. Like, that's what I feel like right now, thinking that Colorado could actually go to the Big 12 championship game and the college football playoff, even if they don't go to the conference championship game. But to Deion's credit, man, he's built this thing in a way where, okay, you're competitive in the Big 12. Even if you're not that competitive nationally, you can put yourself in a position to get in. And think about what would happen if they get to the Big 12 championship and or the college football playoff. It doesn't matter if they get smoked.
Yeah.
They could lose 50-0. It doesn't matter because he was hired to make Colorado cool again. And he did it. That was his first job. First responsibility, he did it. And his second responsibility, or third, fourth, and fifth, depending on what Rick George actually has in that contract, is to make them winners. So I'm buying them. I think that, okay, they might drop one of those games because there's still talented players on some of those teams that have underachieved. But even like 9, even if they lose every game from here on out, it's a success. But no, I'm buying them. I think that when the selection committee releases their rankings, you're going to see them probably ranked higher than we think. And if they keep winning, we have to legitimately discuss them as a playoff team in addition to a Big 12 championship caliber team.
I think I'm more of a Tim and Eric guy myself. That's my little with the fireworks in the background.
I like it.
One of the great gifts that exists in the world.
Absolutely.
This reminds me vaguely, they're a much better team, but bear with me on the reference, of Trae Young's Oklahoma team.
Lost to Hawks. The Hawks super, like I'm a long-suffering Hawks fan, so I really appreciate Trae Young.
They lose to Rhode Island in the NCAA tournament. We all look around and we're like, why were they there in the first place? Well, because Trae Young was such an elite player, you kind of couldn't leave him out of March Madness.
Correct.
Not that I think Colorado's more complete than that Oklahoma basketball team, sure, but I am confident 10-2 Colorado would get in the playoff over 10-2 Kansas State, or if we get there, 10-2 Indiana or 10-2 Iowa State, because
I would say even a 10-2 SEC team. Because if you have 5 10-2 SEC teams, whether the playoff committee says it or not, they're not going to want to put that many SEC teams in.
No,
and
I don't
they're
think they
sure
do.
as hell going to want to put Colorado in.
Deion Sanders, Shedeur Sanders, the Heisman Trophy winner Travis Hunter, who just won Defensive and Offensive Player of the Week in the Big 12.
They will never admit
the same
it, but
week.
they 100% will consider it, even if it's subconsciously.
Yes.
Even if it's subconsciously.
And with that, I think the best case scenario, we will get here to talking more playoff in the third segment, but the best case scenario is Colorado goes 10-2, misses the Big 12 championship. They can miss the Big 12 championship, and we still look around and go, hey, wait a second. They're 10-2, number 13 in the country, and at least a bubble team. Does their brand get them in?
They'll never say that, but yes, it'd almost be better if they didn't make the Big 12 championship game in that scenario. But yeah, they're the name brand. I've gone through that process, the mock process. Like, they never say things that are reality, right? Everyone put your hat on the hat tree on the way in. Like, of course, people are going to have biases that benefit their permanent actual job, right? Of course, those people will. Of course, the success of the playoff and the money that it brings in matters. It just does.
Yep.
And you can go back to the Big 12 with Ohio State, TCU, and Baylor. If Ohio State wasn't Ohio State, let's just say it was Indiana, they wouldn't have gotten in.
Right.
Of course they wouldn't have gotten in. So the name brand matters. No offense to anybody else in the Big 12. Colorado is light years in terms of name brand.
And that is, I want to correct us a bit here, Barrett. Deion Sanders is light years ahead when it comes to name brand. You know, I mean, that's
fair enough.
For a Colorado school they went 14 out of the last 16 years without going 500. Putrid, terrible football. And then Deion Sanders shows up day one and they immediately become a national story. And
what you just said so crazy, because I'm 44 and like my entire middle school and high school time, I'm like, Colorado is always in the discussion for a national championship.
Oops. Yeah, that's been a long time there, Barrett. I'm sorry to add that one in. Time flies when you're watching Colorado football. They have been bad. And now Deion Sanders brings them to the forefront. And at the very least, they're a national conversation enough to be in the college football playoff. Speaking of that, let's go into how many Big 12 teams can get in. And if it's still just one, that was the preseason consensus. It's shaking out a bit differently. This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On College Football, smothered and covered crossover. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hey, the show today is brought to you by FanDuel. The reason that I love FanDuel is because I can say, hey, FanDuel, I think that Colorado is going to beat Cincinnati, and I think they're going to cover the 5-6 points that you're giving me. So I'm going to go on FanDuel and give them my money in reference to Colorado. And then when Colorado wins, FanDuel says, not only here is your money back, but here's more money on top of that because you were correct in your assessment. And that's the beauty of FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, you can make live bets too. Middle of a game, your team's down by 14. You know they're going to come back. Go bet on them live on FanDuel. And new customers can get $5. So you can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com today. FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Drake Toll alongside Barrett Slee talking a lot of the Big 12 today on Locked On Big 12 and Locked On College Football Smothered and Covered. Barrett, will the Big 12, as was written into law in the preseason, only get one team in the college football playoff?
The answer is probably no. I mean, it's like I said before, it's so hard to sort of figure this out because we've never done this before.
Yeah.
My answer is probably
Can I pause
yes.
you there then? The idea of the 12-team playoff being so catastrophic for you, where does that come from for those who aren't familiar with your very clear take that you've made many times?
I prefer excellence over access. Really, a Big 12 team is not one of the best teams in the country, right? But a team can get hot. Washington State might get in and get hot. The regular season does matter. That's why I fell in love with college football. In this day and age, I don't care that we might be talking about bids and buys for the next month of the season.
bubble conversation.
I enjoy college football because of the uncertainty, because you can lose in week 2 and you might think your season is over, but it might not be, because all hell could break loose in the month of November. That's a feature. That's not a bug, right? And I also value the national championship in terms of teams being excellent. Liberty might make the playoff. I literally saw Kennesaw State beat Liberty up close in person last week. They still could make the playoff as a one-loss team. Not likely, but they could, right? Those teams don't deserve it because they had, and excellence is subjective. I get that. And I think in addition to automatic bids, right? There's no, like, if you're the Big 12 champion or the second team in the Big 12, what have you done to be better than 3 or 4 teams in the SEC? I like the fact that before we could define the season based on the landscape of the season, and it changes. And that's great to me. So all of those things together, really, I love the BCS. I wish we could go back. I also don't like the fact that there are people that have other interests that are deciding this thing. In my opinion, if we are going to do this, which obviously we are, you should make the selection committee full-time employees, right? Full-time employees where they're loyal to their paycheck, where they're loyal to their families, and that's it, right? Because in our world, right, that's sort of how we operate. We don't affect the play on the field all that much, right, but we're supposed to be, analyst, radio host, whatever. And for my term, a writer back in the old, I guess I still am. But I am loyal to my family. I am loyal because I want to buy the stuff that I have to pay for school, all that stuff. And so I went to Auburn, right? All these Alabama fans, oh, you went to Auburn, you're biased. I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, there's a diploma right there. There's also a whole house around here, right? There's also kids' bedrooms upstairs. I don't care that the diploma's on the wall. I care that I can put it on the wall that I paid for, right? So, I would make them full-time employees. So all of that combined. But with the Big 12 this year in the playoff, I think there will be 2. I think there are a few things working against it for me to be wrong. And so I guess we'll go from there because, the landscape is kind of determined by other things, right? Outside the Big 12. Washington State's a problem. I don't think people are talking about that. It's a big problem. I think the Big 10 being more than just Oregon and Ohio State is a big problem. Penn State and Indiana could gobble up spots. I thought there'd only be 2 Big 10 teams in my predictions. I didn't anticipate Penn State and Indiana. The SEC might actually help out the Big 12 because I had 5 SEC teams in my playoff prediction. That's not going to happen because they're going to gobble each other up. The ACC is a bigger problem for the Big 12 because I said this on Smothered and Covered yesterday. Clemson's actually becoming not just a team that can get in, but a team that can win it the way they've evolved, right? We've moved past the Georgia game in week 1. Miami obviously is there too. Yeah. Don't count out SMU. The schedule's very easy from here on out. We have Pitt. All this stuff together for the ACC could play against the Big 12 too, especially if a team like Virginia Tech gets to Charlotte and actually wins it, right? That's like worst case scenario for everybody. Yeah. So if all things stay sort of sober, so to speak, and college football doesn't get drunk, then I think 2 Big 12 teams is probably where they're going to be. But there are a lot of other variables that can play into that.
Couple things. 2007, LSU, 2-loss, gets into the BCS National Championship, wins the national championship, having lost their final regular season game of the year against Arkansas on the road. And I remember vividly how chaotic that was. But I think the best team in college football won the national championship, right? Sure. And the regular season mattered the whole way. Today, Alabama can lose in week 2 and then lose again in week 9. And okay, cool. They lost, but they're still in the college football playoff. That takes away, it invalidates a large part of your regular season. When, lose a couple, you've got a few mulligans.
Well, and not to jump in, but I'll give you a perfect example of that. Yeah. I covered Alabama, Georgia this year. Mm-hmm. Crazy game. Awesome game, right? Alabama blew the 28-point lead. Georgia took the lead. Ryan Williams happened. Just one of the most bonkers, crazy, chaotic games I've ever seen. On the field after, we're Georgia players were like, okay, well, I heard multiple times, we'll see you again.
Yeah.
We'll see you again. And I'm like, think about what would the reaction have been if that was in the BCS era. Like devastation.
Yeah.
And like total devastation. And I saw like a bunch of folks say, well, this is validation that the 12-team playoff is good because those are the two best teams in the country and Georgia can still get in. I'm like, yeah, that's the problem. They can still get in because the reaction here in the field right in front of you is not what it would have been 10 years ago.
Well, that's a lot of SEC talk that we've done today.
Sorry, I apologize.
In the college football playoff conversation of how you get Big 12 teams in, it is going to take something outside of this conference to happen for that to become reality. The last scenario I want to pitch you here, Barrett, and I want to see what you think, because I host Locked On Big 12, and believe it or not, that's a propaganda machine for the Big 12. In the dream scenario, we get to that Iowa State-Kansas State game where Iowa State's 11-0. BYU's cleaned up, finished business. They're 12-0 going to the Big 12 championship. Kansas State wins that game. 11-1 Kansas State, 11-1 Iowa State, 12-0 BYU, 10-2 Colorado at that point. Colorado, Iowa State missed the Big 12 championship game. They're both, at least in the bubble conversation, no doubt.
Sure.
Kansas State goes and wins the Big 12 championship. Now we're looking at 12-win BYU, 12-win Kansas State, 11-1 Iowa State, 10-2 Colorado. In this perfect Big 12 storm, there is no way to keep the Big 12 from having at least two.
No doubt. No doubt. You just did a lot of math, and math is not my.
You see what's going on here?
I went to Auburn. We don't do math.
Yeah. I went to Baylor. I actually took ideas in math. We didn't do a lot of math. I took ideas in mathematics where we discussed what it would be like if we did math.
That's awesome. That scenario it would be fascinating in that because
what do you do?
You would have the Deion factor, right? Yeah. Two lost Deion. You're on the bubble, but you really don't deserve it. But do you deserve it for financial reason? All this other stuff. But I think that would be a great scenario because, like I said, I conceded the election. We're in the system, whatever. The intrigue on Selection Sunday would be awesome because in that situation, you would also have probably at least one or two Big Ten teams in that discussion, probably one or two ACC teams, definitely multiple SEC teams, and then whoever from outside, the Pac-12, the two, like if Washington State does its thing or whatever.
Oh, Notre Dame too. Like Notre Dame.
Yeah. Dude, I saw Notre Dame up close and personal 2 weeks ago when they played Georgia Tech, and I described this on the show. They are the best boring team I've ever seen. I was so bored in that game.
Pittsburgh Steelers of college football.
Right. Exactly. I'm sitting here going, God dang, this team is so good. And I don't even care because they just go about their business. Notre Dame would be involved too. And I think Notre Dame's going to make the playoff anyway. But it would be, I would love to see that discussion. Mm-hmm. I do think in that scenario, having a third team would definitely be in the cards. 4 would not be, but a third team could definitely be in the cards there.
Yeah. And it very well could be. Iowa State fans won't like it. It could be 10-2 Colorado against an Iowa State team coming off of their first loss of the season. But hey, Deion Sanders is going to pay the bills a lot more than Matt Campbell or Abu Sama. And that's the reality of a human being led college football playoff committee that is still focused on dollar signs that have overtaken college football and ultimately ruined a product that was so good. Barrett, where can folks find more of the work that you do if they are listening to you for the first time here on Locked On Big 12?
Yeah, college football smothered and covered. YouTube page, Apple, Spotify, all that stuff. People know how to do the podcast thing. All the places you get podcasts.
If they're here, they should. They should at this point.
Here. Right, exactly. If you're listening or watching, you've already got that covered. So all those places, college football smothered and covered. Just search for that. Also, SiriusXM. Definitely Sunday mornings, 8 to 11 Central Time. And then throughout the week, whenever they need me, and then I'll kick as well, right? And so there might be more coming in the towards the end of the season in terms of content. So I'm busy.
Boom. And you're taking your son tonight to baseball practice.
I am.
Yeah,
I am, and It's cold, man. Sitting there, I played baseball. I love baseball. Sitting and watching a practice for 2 hours in the cold at night is far less entertaining than actually practicing.
Yeah. As Kenny Chesney said, don't blink. Don't blink.
It's true.
I'm Drake Toll from Locked On Big 12. Barrett Slee, who joined the show today with a little crossover edition. We'll be talking football, college football specifically, all week long on Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. College football smothered and covered, and Dose Grande. All right.